Our agricultural system is highly dependent on fossil fuel for fertilizer, and yet there's a fertilizer that we flush down our toilets every day, our human waste. Instead of using this as a resource, it's actually a liability in our society and in our economy. So we send it down the toilet, it goes to the sewage treatment plant, and we have to expend lots of resources to clean up that water that we've dirtied, and or it is sent out into the nearest waterway as raw sewage, where it causes all sorts of other problems. So throughout millennia of human history, they made use of this resource. They called it night soil, and they spread it on their fields, and it increased their yields of their crops. It wasn't always done in a sanitary way, and it did lead to the spread of disease. They didn't understand how disease was spread. They didn't understand bacteria. And now we understand all these things, and yet we're still using technology that is over 100 years old to deal with our waste. And you have to ask if, like, our science and technology is giving us a new magic phone every year, why we're still dealing with our shit in the same way that we did 100 years ago, sending it down a sewer and then letting a sewage treatment plant deal with it. Seems like with our new knowledge and our new technology, we should be developing some way to make use of our shit and not have it continue to be a liability that takes us expending resources to clean it out of our water. Just seems like it's only logical that you don't mix your shit in your drinking water. Yet we do that all the time as if it's normal. And I guess it's convenient to have a toilet that you can just flush and you see the water wash your shit away. But there's a better system, and we're doing it here. It's called HUMANURE. So whenever I need to do a number 2, I just go in here. And I've got this box that I made with a toilet seat on top of it, and it holds a bucket. Just a simple bucket that probably at one time maybe had some Pizza Hut sauce in it or something, but it's a reclaimed bucket now, and that's all I need for this HUMANURE system. So I just come in, take the lid off of it, make a deposit, and then put a scoop of sawdust in there, cover it up, and put the lid back on. And I'm done. And it keeps the smell down. And then once this bucket is full, I take it out of here through the front door here. And I put it outside until I need to take it to the humi bins. So you can see that this HUMANURE has broken down, and it's basically just like soil. It's like rich compost. And really there's no sign of the sawdust left, and obviously no sign of the poop. And it smells like earth, smells like soil, and like compost, finished compost. Because that's what it is. It's basically a valuable resource that normally people would flush down their toilets. And you can see that this wild hemlock that's growing here is just so green and vigorous, growing on top of this pile of rich nitrogen and nutrient-rich compost, you know? I see this as a vital resource, and I'm going to use it in my garden. It's been over 2 years that this has been sitting here, so there's really no chance of any pathogens still existing in this. In the past, I think people didn't compost their human waste first and they just spread it on their fields, and that's kind of a recipe for disaster and the spread of disease. But if you keep your system contained in an isolated area away from where you normally do food preparation and things like that, you're not going to have any problems. Our HUMANURE composting area is on the outskirts of our village, and it's unlikely to interfere with any of our water supply. It's downhill from most of the village. It's finally my turn to do the HUMANURE shift, which means I do up to like 12 different buckets here. And since we have a system for our common house and some of the other public bathrooms that we have shifts and we rotate who empties these things. And because I have my own Humi bin in my house, I'm not on the full rotation. So I only do it once a year. Probably if you're in the full rotation, you might do it 2 or 3 times a year, so it's not a huge difference. Because I basically just use these bins. I'm not using the common house Humi stalls. And by the way, Humi is short for HUMANURE, which is the system that we use here. And I can't remember the name of the guy that wrote the book on it, but it was his book that, you know, laid out this plan for composting your human waste. And so that's more or less the system that we use. I think we do it a lot simpler and maybe less carefully in terms of like the mix that we do in our composting operation. Basically, we're just throwing sawdust into our mix and, you know, limiting adding anything that's not just straight human waste or toilet paper. But it seems to work fine. I mean, things break down fine. It might go faster if we had a more organized system. And this is kind of part of the reason why I think this is such an easy thing to do and that anybody could do at their house if they have, you know, the space to do an operation like this. I don't know, in the city, there might be a smell that you have to deal with, because usually that's what happens when I dump these buckets. There's pretty strong smell, but then you put the straw over it, and that ideally would cover up the smell. People do other kind of composting operations, and compost tends to stink even just from food waste, but it doesn't smell quite the same as human waste. So you might want to make sure that your neighbors would be okay with this before you did anything like this. In a city, in the country, anybody could do it, and probably don't have a whole lot to worry about as far as offending your neighbors. And this kind of a system is not really for the squeamish. Most people don't have to deal with this many buckets of shit at once. Like for my house, I do at most 3 at a time, and it goes really quickly. When you have 12 to do, it takes a lot longer, but considering I only have to do it once a year, and I get the benefit of, you know, being a part of these beautiful HUMANURE bins over here, where we've got this organized composting operation, it seems like a small price to pay. And normally you would also have a partner doing this. I don't know why I don't really have a partner. Maybe I just didn't look into it, but I don't really have time to organize it. So I'm just gonna do it on my own today. But yeah, normally you would have 2 people doing these 12 buckets, and so while one is dumping them, the other might be like washing out the buckets. So it's gonna take me a little longer. And the way we do it to start out this dumping of buckets is I just go in with the fork and I clear the straw off the top of the pile, and then, you know, make the deposit of all of this stuff, and then put the straw back on top. And so that way you have sort of a column with straw around the outside, and so you're building this column up, and it's got the straw lining on the outside. And it seems to work pretty well. And obviously, sanitation at this point in the process is pretty key. You want to make sure that you're not touching anything important while you're doing this process, and then you wash your hands immediately after. So now after about 15-20 minutes of this stuff, I'm pretty much done and ready to go take a shower. So anyways, hope this video inspired you to maybe set up your own HUMANURE system and start reclaiming that waste product instead of just flushing it down the toilet. And of course, the way that we do HUMANURE here might not be practical for everyone, but that's why there are composting toilets. There's so much potential for composting human waste and making use of it as a fertilizer so that we can grow more food, turn it into more food instead of it just ending up in our waterways as a liability. Well, thanks for watching Hardcore Sustainable. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you haven't done that yet. Share and give a like to the video, and I'll see you next time.